The gun was already pressed against Warren Granger's chest when Mamie Hale stepped between them. She did not think. She did not plan. One moment she was standing at the edge of the Granger ranch's main room with a carpetbag clutched in both hands and a heart that had long since stopped feeling anything at all. And the next she was filling the narrow space between a cattleman she had known for 12 days and a man named Dolan Cross, who had ridden 400 miles to collect what he believed was owed to him. "Step aside, woman," Cross said. His voice was low and deliberate, the kind of voice that expected obedience and had always received it. Mamie did not step aside. She looked at Cross the way she had learned to look at dangerous things in the years since she had stopped being afraid of them, which was to say, she looked at him with the flat, unreadable expression of someone who had already calculated the cost of every possible outcome and found none of them frightening enough to matter. "This is not your land," she said, "and that is not your man." Cross tilted his head, a slow, reptilian movement. His eyes slid from her face to Warren's, and what he found in Warren's expression made him laugh, a short, ugly sound that scraped the air. "Well," Cross said, "that is interesting." Because what Cross found in Warren Granger's face was not fear. It was not even anger. It was something rawer and more unguarded than either of those things. Something that a man who had spent 34 years never allowing himself to be seen had failed, in this exact moment, to conceal. Warren Granger was looking at Mamie Hale with an expression that a man only wears when he has realized, far too late, and with the specific horror of someone who did not see it coming, that another person has become necessary to him. Mamie did not see that expression. She was watching Cross, but Cross saw it, and Cross filed it away like a weapon. 3 days, Cross said, lowering the revolver by precisely 2 inches, the concession of a man making a tactical retreat rather than a genuine one. 3 days, Granger. Then I come back with the deed and the law, and you will have nothing left in this valley worth standing between. He walked out. The door did not slam. It clicked shut with the quiet, deliberate control of a man who wanted them to understand he was not rattled. The room was very still. Mamie set her carpetbag down on the floor. She straightened her spine and turned around, and she found Warren Granger staring at her with that same expression, still unguarded, still unmasked, and she felt something move in her chest that she had not felt in a long time and did not know what to do with. "You should not have done that," Warren said. His voice was rough. "Probably not," Mamie agreed. She had come to the Cimarron Valley in the autumn of 1881 looking for nothing in particular. That was the truest thing she could have said about herself in those days, and also the saddest, though she would not have used the word sad. She would have used the word practical. Mamie Hale was a practical woman. She had been practical at 17 when her mother died. She had been practical at 21 when the man she had been engaged to married someone with a larger inheritance. She had been practical at 25 when she had packed what remained of her life in a single bag and boarded a westbound train from St. Louis with no clear destination and no clear intention beyond the basic animal impulse to be somewhere other than where she had been. She was 27 now. She had been riding that impulse for 2 years. The Cimarron Valley in New Mexico Territory was not a particularly welcoming place in November of 1881. The land was enormous and indifferent in the way that large things are indifferent, not cruel, but simply too vast to concern itself with any one person's arrival. The town of Cutter's Bend sat at the valley's eastern edge like an afterthought, a single main street of unpainted boards, a general store, a livery stable, a saloon called the Cottonwood, a sheriff's office that looked as though the sheriff had lost an argument with it, and a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Edna Prout who asked no questions and charged $3 a week. Mamie had taken a room at Prout's boarding house on a Wednesday afternoon with the intention of staying until she decided where she was going next. She had not decided. The valley held her in the way that certain places hold certain people, not through beauty or comfort, but through a quality of the light or the air or some unnamed thing that makes a restless body finally stop moving. The sky over Cimarron Valley was enormous. Standing under it in the early morning, when the last of the night was still retreating from the mesa tops, Mamie felt something she had not felt in 2 years. Not peace, exactly. More like the absence of the particular anxiety of being somewhere she was supposed to leave. She found work quickly because she was capable and because Mrs. Prout knew everyone in Cutter's Bend and told them all that her new boarder was intelligent, reliable, and did not complain about hard work. Within a week, Mamie was keeping the books at the general store 3 days a week and helping Mrs. Prout with laundry and correspondence on the other days. It was honest work. It paid. It required nothing of her heart. She heard about Warren Granger before she met him. In a town the size of Cutter's Bend, you heard about the prominent people before you encountered them in person, the way you might read about a mountain on a map before you actually looked up and saw it against the sky. Warren Granger came up in conversation the way mountains do, referenced casually by people who had long since ceased to be impressed by the size of the thing. "Granger's cattle drive came through last week," said Mr. Aldridge at the general store, flipping through invoices without looking up. "Granger's fence line's been pushed back again," said the sheriff, Jonas Reed, drinking coffee at the counter, his expression one of a man who dealt with cattle disputes approximately 4 times a week and had developed strong opinions about all parties involved. "Warren Granger has not eaten a meal in town since his wife passed," said Mrs. Prout very quietly, one evening while she and Mamie were sitting on the boarding house porch watching the last of the sunset burn itself out over the mesa. She said it the way people say things they have thought about often and have never found the right context for. "That was 3 years ago. Some people believed he would sell off the Granger ranch eventually. He has not. He runs the whole operation with 6 ranch hands and that foreman of his, Hector Delgado, and he has never once asked anyone in this town for help." She paused. "He is a proud man, not an unkind one, proud." "That sounds lonely," Mamie said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Prout looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who has been watching people for 60 years and knows what it means when someone reveals something true about themselves by accident. "Yes," Mrs. Prout said simply. "I imagine it does." Mamie met Warren Granger on a Friday morning 12 days after she arrived in Cutter's Bend, and she met him in the most unglamorous possible way, which was over a disputed invoice for 300 pounds of feed corn at Aldridge's general store. She was behind the counter, working through the store's ledger with the methodical patience of someone who genuinely found numbers soothing, when the bell above the door announced a customer, and she looked up to find a man who was clearly accustomed to taking up space doing exactly that. Warren Granger stood in the doorway of Aldridge's general store the way he stood in most places, she would later learn, which was with the particular stillness of someone who has spent long enough outdoors that they have absorbed a quality of the landscape itself. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a cattleman's habitual squint from too many years of reading weather and distance. He had dark hair going silver at the temples and a jaw that had not seen a razor in approximately 4 days and hands that were large and calloused, and held his hat with the unconscious habit of a man who had been taught manners young and retained them without thinking about it. He was 34 years old, though he looked older than that in certain lights and younger in others, and he had the face of a man who had made a private decision at some point to stop expecting things to be easy. "I need to see about an invoice," he said to Mamie. "Then you have come to the right person," she said. "Which invoice?" He set a folded paper on the counter. She picked it up and read it. He watched her read it with the faint impatience of a man who was not accustomed to waiting and was making a conscious effort to wait anyway. "Mr. Aldridge charged you for 40 pounds of tallow soap that you did not order," Mamie said, looking up. "It is an error in the transcription. I can see where he made it. I will correct it." Warren blinked, just slightly, as though he had expected an argument and was briefly disoriented by the absence of one. "How long will that take?" he asked. "Approximately 90 seconds, she said. He watched her correct the ledger and write out an amended invoice in a neat, clear hand and hand it to him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You are new," he said. "I am," she agreed. "Where from?" "St. Louis most recently, before that other places." He seemed to consider whether to ask more about that and decided against it, which Mamie appreciated because most people could not resist asking more about that. He folded the corrected invoice and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Thank you," he said. It was not a perfunctory thank you. He said it the way a man says it who means it and does not say it lightly. "You are welcome," Mamie said. He put his hat back on and left. Mamie looked at the door for a moment after it closed. Then she went back to the ledger. She did not think about him for the rest of that day. Or if she did not allow herself to notice that she was doing it. The trouble with Dahlen Cross had begun long before Mamie arrived in the Cimarron Valley. It had begun, in the precise legal and historical sense, in the spring of 1878, when a man named Elias Marsh had sold a disputed parcel of land on the northern edge of the Granger Ranch's pasture to two different buyers on the same day, Warren Granger and a land speculator from Santa Fe named Dahlen Cross. This kind of thing happened in New Mexico Territory, with a regularity that made the territory's land disputes legendary throughout the West. The land records were incomplete, the surveys were contradictory, and the territorial courts moved with the speed of something geological. Warren had been running cattle on the disputed pasture for 3 years. Cross had the bill of sale. Warren had the fence line and the prior use. Cross had the lawyers. The situation had been simmering for months before Mamie's arrival. It came to a boil in the 3rd week of November, when Cross sent 2 of his hired men to pull down a section of Warren's fence line, and the Granger hands repaired it overnight, and Cross responded by sending a letter through his attorney in Santa Fe, asserting his intention to arrive in person and settle the matter definitively. Mamie learned about this not from Warren but from Hector Delgado, who was a compact, serious man of Mexican heritage in his early 40s who had worked for the Granger family since before Warren's father died, and who came into Aldridge's store the day after the fence incident to buy coffee, and told the story with the controlled fury of a man who had watched his employer be wronged too many times and had nowhere to put his anger. "Cross has no legitimate claim," Hector said. "Any honest judge would see that, but there are not enough honest judges in this territory for every man who needs one." "What will Mr. Granger do?" Mamie asked. Hector looked at her. He had a way of looking at people that suggested he was assessing them more thoroughly than the question warranted. "He will do what he has always done," Hector said. "He will stand his ground. He has too much pride and too much history in that land to do anything else." He paused. "What worries me is that Cross has done this before in other territories. He finds a weakness and he pushes at it until something gives. Warren does not have a weakness, except for the one thing all isolated men have." "And what is that?" Mamie said. Hector picked up his coffee and his change and looked at her with something that was not quite a smile. "They do not ask for help," he said. "They do not know how." She went to the Granger ranch for the first time 2 days later, and she went for a practical reason that had nothing to do with Warren specifically. Sheriff Jonas Reed had asked her to help him compile some documentation about the disputed land claim, because she had the clearest handwriting in Cutter's Bend and the most organized mind, and he needed someone to help him sort through the relevant deeds and survey notes before Cross arrived with his lawyers. Warren, Reed said, had the original survey paperwork from when his father had filed the land claim in 1864. It needed to be copied and organized. The Granger Ranch was 4 miles south of Cutter's Bend, and Reed drove her out in his buckboard on a gray morning that smelled of coming snow. The ranch was not what she had expected, though she could not have said what she had expected. The main house was adobe with a wide porch and thick walls and small windows that had been built for function, to hold heat in winter and keep heat out in summer, rather than for appearance. There were corrals and a large barn and several outbuildings and a bunkhouse, and in the distance the pasture rolled toward the base of the mesa, where the disputed fence line was, and beyond it, the northern grazing land that Cross wanted. Warren came out onto the porch when their buckboard pulled up, and he watched them climb down with an expression of polite wariness. He had clearly not been told that Mamie would be the one Reed was bringing with him. "Miss Hale," he said. "Mr. Granger," she said. Reed explained the purpose of the visit. Warren showed them to his study, which was a small room off the main hall with a heavy oak desk and shelves lined with ledgers and papers in the organized disorder of a man who knew where everything was even if it did not look that way to anyone else. He left them to it mostly, appearing periodically in the doorway to answer questions or pull a particular document from a shelf. Mamie worked for 4 hours. She sorted and copied and organized, and when she found an 1871 survey map that directly contradicted Cross's bill of sale, she spread it flat on the desk and called for Warren in a voice that brought him from the back of the house at a pace slightly faster than his usual unhurried one. She showed him the discrepancy. She showed him specifically how the parcel boundaries on the 1871 survey did not match the boundaries described in the Marsh bill of sale that Cross was relying on. Warren looked at the map for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Bottom of the 3rd stack," she said. "You should build yourself a filing cabinet, Mr. Granger. You would not believe what a filing cabinet can save a man." He stared at her for another moment, and then something shifted in his face, very slightly, the specific softening of a man who has been braced against difficulty for so long that being helped feels like an unexpected physical sensation. "Hector said the same thing," he said quietly, 2 years ago. "Then you should listen to Hector," she said. The ghost of something moved across his mouth, not quite a smile, the structural precursor to one. She went back to the Granger ranch the following morning with Reed to finish the documentation, and Warren gave her coffee, real coffee from good beans, not the scorched variety she had been drinking at Mrs. Pruitt's, and they sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes while the coffee cooled, and he asked, without any particular aggression, but with the directness of a man who did not waste words on circuitousness, what had brought her to the Cimarron Valley. She gave him the honest answer because something about the directness of his question made dishonesty feel like a waste of time. "I was somewhere that was not working," she said. "And then I was somewhere else. And then I was here." He considered that. "Is here working?" he asked. She looked at her coffee cup, then at the kitchen, which had the clean, functional austerity of a room kept by a man alone who still valued order, then out the window at the gray sky and the mesa and the enormousness of the valley beyond. "It might be," she said. He did not push it further. She appreciated that. She came back 3 more times over the following week, ostensibly to help Reed finalize the documentation. The 3rd time, she came alone because Reed had a prior commitment, and she knew where everything was and what needed to be done. And Warren let her in without question and made coffee without being asked, and sat at the other end of the kitchen table reading his account ledgers while she worked, and it was the most companionable silence she had inhabited in 2 years. It was on the 11th day that he showed her the rest of the ranch. She had finished with the survey papers and was preparing to leave when he appeared in the study doorway with his hat and coat and said, without any particular preamble, "Come see the North Pasture before you go. You should understand what we are trying to protect." She followed him out past the corrals to where the land opened up and the grass, winter pale but deep and rich in the way of good grazing land, rolled toward the distant fence line. He walked beside her, and he talked about the land the way people talk about the things they love when they finally find someone they believe will understand the value of them. He talked about his father, James Granger, who had come to New Mexico Territory from Tennessee in 1862 and filed the land claim in 1864 and built the ranch from nothing with a stubbornness that was either admirable or insane, depending on who you asked. He talked about the particular quality of the grass in the North Pasture, a native blue grama grass that had been there before any human fence was built, and how his cattle did better on it than on any of the supplemental hay he bought from Aldridge's. He talked about the spring near the mesa base that fed the pasture, and how the water rights were tied to the land claim, and how Cross, if he succeeded, would effectively control the water. He did not talk about his wife. But he talked about the house once briefly, saying that she had put the porch on it, the wide porch with the posts and the overhanging roof, because she had come from Virginia and believed firmly that any civilized dwelling required a porch. He said it without grief, exactly, but with the specific quality of voice that carries grief that has been lived with long enough to become architectural, built into the structure of ordinary speech. Mamie did not offer condolences because she sensed they were not what he wanted, and she was right about that. What he wanted, she thought, watching his face while he looked out over the north pasture, was simply for someone to stand in the same place and look at the same thing and understand why it mattered. She understood why it mattered. On the 12th day, Dolan Cross arrived. She was at the ranch when it happened. She had come out early because she had thought of 2 more things that needed to be done with the documentation, and she had been lying awake the previous night, which was unusual for her. She was usually a sound sleeper. She attributed the wakefulness to the tension of the impending arrival of Cross and his lawyers, and not to anything else. Cross came in the early afternoon with 2 lawyers and 2 hired men who were not lawyers, and whose presence served a different function. He knocked on the ranch house door with the assurance of a man who did not expect a door to remain closed to him, and when Warren answered it, Cross walked inside without being invited in the way that men of his particular variety of arrogance were accustomed to doing. He found Mamie at Warren's desk, surrounded by papers. Cross was not a large man. He was of middling height and middling build, with a face that was handsome in the specific, cold way of a man who has learned to use his face as a tool. He was perhaps 45, with dark eyes and a gray-streaked mustache and the wardrobe of a man who wanted you to know he could afford to be well-dressed anywhere he went, including a cattle ranch in New Mexico territory. He looked at Mamie with those dark, assessing eyes and then looked at Warren. "I did not expect company," Cross said. "Miss Hale is assisting me with business matters," Warren said. His voice was level. "Of course she is," Cross said, and the way he said it carried a particular quality of implication that made Mamie's jaw tighten. The meeting that followed was not a friendly one. Cross laid out his claim with the precision of a man who had done it before and enjoyed the process. His lawyers had prepared a formidable document. Warren had his survey evidence and his prior use and his family history in the land, but Cross had a territorial court date scheduled for mid-December, and he was confident in his position. He said, smiling in a way that did not involve warmth. And then, when the legal conversation had run its course and Warren had said, quietly and without flinching, that he would contest the claim in every available court and take whatever time that required, Cross had done the thing that Mamie had not anticipated. He had pulled out the revolver. He said it was to underscore his seriousness. He said it was a gesture of emphasis, not a threat. His lawyers looked at the floor. His hired men looked at the ceiling. And Warren Granger stood in his own kitchen in his own house on his own land and looked at the barrel of a gun held by a man who had no right to be holding anything in that room, and his face was calm with the calm of a man who has decided that whatever happens next will not include showing fear. And Mamie had stepped between them. And Cross had made his 3-day ultimatum and left, and the door had clicked shut with that deliberate, controlled quiet, and the room was still. Mamie crossed to the desk and began gathering her papers with the methodical movements of someone who needed to do something with her hands. "You should not have done that," Warren said again. He said it differently this time, less rough. There was something in it that was closer to fear than anything she had seen in his face during the confrontation itself. The retroactive fear of a person who has realized something terrible might have happened to someone they do not want to lose. "I was not going to let him shoot you," Mamie said simply. "That would have made the documentation entirely pointless." She heard him move across the room. She did not look up from the papers. She was aware of him with a specificity that she had been trying not to be aware of for the past 12 days, the particular gravity of another person in close proximity, the way the air in a room changes when someone stands close enough to matter. "Miss Hale," he said. She looked up. He was very close. He had the look of a man who had been about to say something and had arrived at the moment of saying it and found, suddenly, that he did not have words for it. The words were not there because the feeling was too large and too new, and he had not yet had enough time to build language around it. "Warren," she said. She used his first name without thinking. It was the first time she had done so. He looked at her, that open, unguarded look again, the one Cross had seen and catalogued as a weapon. 3 days, he said finally. It was not what he had been about to say, but it was what he said. 3 days, she agreed. Then we will need to be ready. She went back to Cutter's Bend that evening and sat on Mrs. Pruitt's porch in the cold and watched the stars come out over the mesa and tried to understand what was happening to her, which was complicated by the fact that she had come to this valley looking for nothing and had therefore not built any internal category for the things she might find here. You cannot file a feeling under a heading that does not exist yet. What she felt was this. For the first time in several years, she cared about an outcome. She cared what happened to that land and that ranch and the man who stood in the north pasture and talked about his father's stubbornness with a voice that held more love than it knew how to name. She cared whether the filing cabinet she had mentally designed for his study ever got built. She cared whether he ate properly, because she had noticed on multiple occasions that there was very little evidence of regular meals in that kitchen. She cared in the specific, inconvenient way that was not at all the same as the detached concern she had felt for other people's problems before this. She did not call it love because she was a practical woman, but she sat on that porch for a long time. She was at the ranch by 7 the following morning. Warren was already up. He was always already up, and Hector was there as well, and Sheriff Reed rode in at 7:30, and they sat around the kitchen table and laid out the strategy. The documentation Mamie had compiled was their strongest asset. The 1871 survey map was the cornerstone. Reed had telegraphed a lawyer in Santa Fe, a man named James Portillo, who had experience with exactly this kind of territorial land dispute. And Portillo had replied that the case was strong, but that they needed to move quickly. Portillo would come himself if they could get him on the next available stage, which Reed confirmed was the day after tomorrow. "That gives us 1 day to spare before Cross's deadline," Hector said. "Cross's deadline is a bluff," Warren said. "He does not have the court date until December. He cannot do anything legally before that. The gun was theater." "Theater can still cause harm," Mamie said. "His hired men are a genuine concern." Warren looked at her. "I agree," he said. "Which is why I would prefer that you remained in town until this is resolved, Miss Hale." There it was. The thing she had been expecting from him, the protective impulse of a man who had decided she mattered and had therefore decided she should be kept safe, which was in direct conflict with the autonomy of a woman who had made her own decisions for quite a long time and had no interest in someone else making them for her. "With respect," she said, "I am the one who organized that documentation. I am the one who found the 1871 survey. I know this case better than anyone at this table except you, and you are not a lawyer. I intend to be here when Portillo arrives." Warren's jaw tightened, then released. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met," he said. "I have heard that before," she said. "It has never once changed my mind." Hector made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close enough to one that Warren gave him a sharp look. "Fine," Warren said, and then after a pause, "Thank you for being stubborn." It was said quietly and it was said without looking at her, which was how she knew he meant it completely. The day unfolded in practical industry. Mamie organized the copies of the documentation into a package for Portillo. Reed went to town to send additional telegrams. Hector rode the fence line. Warren worked with 2 of his hands, a younger man named Eli and an older one named Cass, reinforcing the disputed section of fence, not because the fence itself would stop Cross, but because it was something to do with a body when the mind was grinding through an unsolvable equation. In the late afternoon, when the gray sky had begun to take on the orange cast of approaching sunset, Mamie stepped out onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee and found Warren sitting on the porch steps looking north toward the fence line and the mesa. She handed him a cup and sat beside him, not at a polite, proprietary distance. Beside him. He took the coffee and drank it, and they sat in silence for a while. "Tell me something about St. Louis," he said. It was such an unexpected thing to ask that she looked at him. He was watching the mesa. His profile in the fading light was a clean, tired line. "What would you like to know?" she asked. "Anything," he said. "You know most things about me now. It only seems fair." She thought about that. She could have offered him something safe and impersonal, the architecture of the city, the commerce, the river. But he had said anything, and she had decided somewhere in the past 12 days that she was going to be honest with this man, even when honesty was inconvenient. "I was engaged," she said, "to a man named Franklin Dobbs. He was a lawyer. He had a good family and a reasonable face, and he was not unkind, exactly. He just decided after 2 years that a woman with a smaller inheritance was not sufficient return on his investment." She paused. "I was more angry than heartbroken. I think that told me something I should have known sooner." Warren was very still beside her. "After that," she said, "I realized I had spent most of my adult life arranging myself to fit the space other people had decided I should occupy. I was tired of it, so I left. To go looking for something," he said. She thought about it. "No," she said, "that is the part people never understand when I try to explain it. I was not looking for anything. I was done looking. I just wanted to exist somewhere without being required to be something specific for someone else's convenience." He turned and looked at her then, fully. Not the peripheral awareness he usually gave her, which was considerable, but his whole attention, and it was a substantial thing, Warren Granger's whole attention, like stepping into a searchlight. "I understand that," he said. She believed him. That was the strange part. The man sitting beside her with the cold coffee and the 4-day beard and the grief that had been built into his architecture for 3 years. She believed without question that he understood exactly what she meant. "I think," he said, and stopped. Looked away, then continued as though the sentence required the momentum of a decision. "I think that when Margaret died, I stopped knowing what I was supposed to be looking for, and then after a while I stopped looking. And I told myself that was the right thing, that a man with a ranch to run had enough to occupy him without spending time on wanting things he could not have." Margaret, his wife's name. The first time he had said it in Mamie's presence. "And was that enough?" she asked. A long pause. The mesa going dark against the luminous sky. "No," he said, very quietly. "It was not enough." They sat there until the cold forced them inside. And inside, Hector had somehow produced a proper dinner. Venison stew with biscuits, and they ate at the kitchen table, 4 of them, Hector and Eli and Warren and Mamie. And the table felt for a moment like the exact thing a table should feel like, warm and full and used. When she left to ride back to town, Warren walked her to her horse. It was a practical courtesy, no more. The night was very cold and very clear, and the stars over the valley were absolute, the way stars are in places far from city light, each one precisely itself. He held her horse's bridle while she mounted, and as she settled into the saddle, he looked up at her with an expression she had learned to recognize, the expression of a man who had something to say and was making decisions about whether to say it. "Miss Hale," he said. "Mamie," she corrected, because they had passed Miss Hale somewhere around the time she had stepped between him and a revolver. He absorbed the correction. "Mamie," he said, just the word, testing it. It sounded different when he said it. She could not have explained why. "Good night, Warren," she said. She rode back to Cutter's Bend with the valley enormous around her, and the cold coming down from the mesa, and a feeling in her chest that she was still not calling by its name. The lawyer, James Portillo, arrived on the stage the following morning. He was a compact, brisk man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and a briefcase that had clearly seen its share of territorial courts. Mamie met him at the stage station with Reed, and they drove him out to the ranch, where Warren was waiting with the documentation she had prepared. Portillo went through everything with the speed and thoroughness of a man who charged by the hour and knew the value of both. He found the 1871 survey map and looked up at Warren with an expression of modified triumph. "This is your case," Portillo said. "Marsh sold Cross a parcel whose boundaries do not align with any legitimately filed survey. Your father's 1864 claim takes precedence, and the 1871 survey confirms the actual boundaries. Cross's bill of sale is for land that Marsh had no legal right to convey. Can you make that argument hold in court?" Reed asked. "I can make it hold in court before Christmas," Portillo said, "provided we file the appropriate documents in Santa Fe by Friday. Today is Wednesday." He looked at his watch, "which gives us approximately 36 hours. Mamie was already at the desk pulling out fresh paper. Portillo looked at her. "Who compiled this documentation?" he asked. "She did," Warren said. Portillo looked at Mamie with a new quality of attention. "Then she has already done 3/4 of my work for me," he said. "Miss Hale, I do not suppose you would consider a career in law." "The territory does not admit women to the bar," she said without bitterness. "Simply a fact." "An injustice," Portillo said also simply. He was not a sentimental man, but he was an honest one. "Shall we get to work?" They worked for 7 hours straight, Portillo and Mamie and Warren, with Reed coming and going as needed, building the legal argument with the patience and precision of something architectural. Warren was not a lawyer, but he was meticulous, and he knew his land and his history. And when Portillo needed a detail about the water rights or the original survey markers, Warren provided it with exact memory. At some point in the late afternoon, Hector brought food that no one paused long enough to eat properly and coffee that everyone drank too fast, and Mamie and Warren ended up working from the same document at the same corner of the desk. Their heads closed together, their voices low and focused, and she was aware, at the periphery of her attention, of the exact proximity of him, the warmth of a large body nearby. The specific quality of his focus, which was absolute and steady and made everything feel manageable. When it was done, Portillo looked over the completed package, made 3 small corrections, and pronounced it sufficient. "You have a strong case," he said to Warren. "Cross may fight it, he has resources, but the truth of the survey is not arguable, and I know how to argue the truth." He paused. "I expect Cross knows he is beaten. The deadline he gave you was theater, as you said. He may not come back." "He may," Warren said. "If he does," Portillo said, looking at him levelly, "he will be contesting a filed legal claim with evidence on record. That changes his position considerably." Reed took Portillo back to town to catch the evening stage south to Santa Fe. Hector went to the bunkhouse. Eli and Cass and the other hands were out or sleeping. And Mamie was at the desk putting the remaining papers in order when she became aware that Warren was standing in the doorway of the study, leaning against the frame, watching her. She had noticed, over the past several days, that he watched her in a specific way. Not the way men sometimes watched women, assessing or proprietary. He watched her the way you watch something that interests you genuinely, with an attention that was respectful and unguarded and a little helpless. The way you watch something that is happening to you rather than something you are choosing to observe. "You should go home," he said. "It is late and it is cold." "I am almost done," she said. "The papers will keep until morning. They will be better done tonight." He was quiet for a moment. "You never stop," he said, not critically, with something closer to wonder. She looked at him. He was still in the doorway, and in the lamplight he had the look of a man who was deciding something. The study was small and the lamp was warm, and outside the window the valley was dark and vast, and the mesa was a dark shape against a dark sky. "I have been thinking," he said, and stopped. "About the case?" She asked. "No," he said, "not about the case." She put down the paper she was holding. "I am not a man who is good at this," he said. I want you to know that before I say anything else. I am not a man who is good at finding words for things. Margaret used to say I communicated primarily by implication, which she found endlessly frustrating and occasionally endearing. He paused. I am going to try not to communicate by implication right now because I think you deserve better than that. Mamie was very still. You came to this valley looking for nothing, he said. That is what you told me, and I believe you. But I want to tell you what I see when I look at you, which is a woman who has not stopped giving since the moment she arrived. Her intelligence and her time and her patience and her stubbornness and herself, to this case, to this land, too. He stopped, started again. To me, and I did not ask you to, and I do not know what that means for you or what you want from it, if anything, but for me, he met her eyes. For me it has meant something I do not have a name for yet, something I have not felt in a long time, something I am not certain I expected to feel again. The lamp burned steadily. The night pressed against the windows. I am not looking for a convenient woman, he said. I want to be very clear about that. I am not looking for someone to fill a practical function in this house. I have Hector for that, and he resents me for it daily. I am saying something different. I am saying that I do not know what this is or where it goes or what it might look like in any practical sense, but I know that when Cross held that gun on me, my first thought was not about the land. Mamie's heart was doing something complicated. Your first thought, she said carefully. What was it? You, he said. That you were in the room and I did not want you to be in danger. And then you stepped in front of me, and my second thought was that you were going to give me a decade of gray hair in the next 45 seconds. The ghost of that almost smile moved through his face again. And my third thought was that I did not want you to leave when this was over. She looked at him for a long moment. I told you I was not looking for anything, she said. I know. And that is still true, she said. I did not come here looking for this. I know, he said again, steady, not asking for anything, just being present in the doorway and telling the truth. But, she said slowly, it appears that I found it anyway. He crossed the room. He stood in front of her with the desk between them and his hands at his sides, and he looked at her the way he had looked at the north pasture on the day he showed it to her, with the combination of love and responsibility, and something ancient and particular that people feel about the things they have decided to protect. Mamie, he said, she had told him to use her name, she had been right to do it. I need more time to know what this is, she said. I need that, I do not make decisions quickly when they matter. I know, he said, I would not ask you to, but I am not leaving, she said. When this is resolved, when Cross is dealt with and Portillo files his papers and the territory sorts itself out, I am not leaving the valley. Something moved in his face that was quiet and profound and not at all small. All right, he said. All right, she said. They were still standing on either side of the desk. It was a very good desk, she had thought so from the beginning. Solid oak, practical and well-made. She picked up her coat from the chair. I will be back in the morning, she said. I know, he said. He said it differently this time. She went out into the cold valley night, and he stood on the porch and watched her ride away, and she knew he was watching, and she did not look back, but she rode the 4 miles to town with a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with any coat. Cross came back on the 3rd day. He came in the morning with his 2 lawyers and only one of the hired men this time, and he did not knock. He pushed the door open and walked in and found Warren at the kitchen table with Mamie and Hector, eating breakfast. Just eating breakfast. A normal domestic scene made dramatic by the specific patience with which all 3 people at the table looked at Cross when he walked in. Your deadline has expired, Cross said. Mr. Cross, Warren said, with the courtesy of a man who had decided that courtesy was the most aggressive tool available to him at this moment. Would you like coffee? We have just made a fresh pot. Cross stared at him. I am here to inform you that I will be initiating legal proceedings. Mr. Portillo filed the appropriate documents in Santa Fe yesterday, Mamie said, from her end of the table, without putting down her coffee cup. I have the receipt of filing here if you would like to review it. She slid a paper across the table. One of Cross's lawyers picked it up. He read it. His expression changed. "Dahlan," the lawyer said, "this complicates things." "It does not complicate anything," Cross said, but his voice had shifted slightly from the register of a man delivering an ultimatum to the register of a man recalibrating. "The 1871 survey evidence is on record," Mamie said. Mr. Portillo argues, with considerable documentation, that Elias Marsh did not have legal authority to convey the parcel in question, which means your bill of sale is for something Mr. Marsh could not legitimately sell. "That will be decided by the court," Cross said. "It will," Warren said pleasantly. "And we are ready for that. Please give our regards to your legal team." Cross looked at Warren. He looked at Mamie. He looked at Hector, who was eating a biscuit with the serenity of a man entirely unconcerned with whatever was about to happen. Cross was a man who had built his career on identifying weakness and exploiting it. He had looked at Warren Granger 3 days ago and seen a man alone, without a legal strategy, without adequate documentation, without the kind of support that makes a man sure of himself. What he saw now was something different, and Dahlan Cross was smart enough to know when a position had changed. "This is not over," he said. "I expect not," Warren said. "But today it is. Goodbye, Mr. Cross." Cross left. His lawyers left. The hired man left. The door clicked shut again with that deliberate control, but this time the quiet was different. Hector finished his biscuit. "He will try again," Hector said, "through the courts." "Let him," Warren said. "Portillo will be ready." He looked at Mamie. She was looking at him. There was a quality of shared understanding in that look, the specific ease of two people who have been through something together and have come out the other side. "More coffee?" she asked. He almost smiled. The full thing this time, very nearly. "Please," he said. The months that followed the filing in Santa Fe were not without difficulty. Cross did contest the claim through the territorial court, as Portillo had predicted. The case dragged through December and into January of 1882 with the speed characteristic of the territorial legal system, which was to say it dragged. Portillo was methodical and thorough, and Warren was patient in the way that men are patient about the things they have decided to keep. And in early February, the territorial judge reviewed the survey evidence and ruled in Warren Granger's favor. The North Pasture remained Granger land. The water rights remained Granger rights. Cross departed the territory for, as far as anyone in Cutter's Bend could determine, somewhere in Colorado, where new opportunities presumably awaited him. The ruling came on a Tuesday, and Hector rode to town to get Warren because Warren was out on the range and Reed had the telegram from Portillo, and by the time they all ended up in Aldridge's general store, where Mamie was behind the counter doing the weekly accounts, there were perhaps 8 people crowded into the space, and Reed was reading the telegram out loud, and Warren was standing very still with his hat in his hand and an expression that was too large for his face. He looked at Mamie. She looked at him. "Congratulations," she said. It was a perfectly measured word that contained about 12 other words inside it. He crossed the store in 4 steps, past Mr. Aldridge and Reed and 2 customers and Hector, who all became suddenly very interested in the shelves and the ceiling and the floor, and he took her hand, which was the first time he had touched her with any intention, and he said, very quietly, very close, so that only she could hear it over the general celebration happening around them, "I want to show you something." She went to the ranch with him that afternoon. He took her to the North Pasture, to the exact spot they had stood on the day he first showed it to her, and they stood there and looked at the fence line and the mesa and the blue grama grass going gold in the February light and the sky that was, as it always was in the Cimarron Valley, enormously itself. He said, "I have been thinking about what I want," she said, "and—" He turned to face her, and it was not the doorway of the study this time. There was no desk between them. There was only the open land and the cold February air, and the full honesty of 2 people who had run out of reasons not to say the things they meant. "I want to know if you would consider staying," he said. Not because I need someone to keep the books or organize the filing cabinet, though I do need a filing cabinet. You were entirely right about that. But because this valley is larger than I know how to live in alone, and I have been living in it alone for 3 years, and I have found in the past several months that I am not willing to go back to that. He took a breath. She had never seen him work this hard for words. I love you, he said. I do not know exactly when it happened, and I am aware that you will have opinions about the timing and whether it is reasonable, and I am prepared to hear those opinions. But I want to say it plainly so there is no ambiguity. I love you, Mamie Hale. I would very much like you to stay. She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved across the north pasture, the grass moved. The cold was the honest, clean cold of winter on open land. The filing cabinet, she said. He blinked. I want it in the study, she said, to the left of the window, and I want proper shelves built, not just boards on pegs, real shelves. She paused. And I want the kitchen door rehung because it does not sit right on the frame and it lets in a draft. He was very still. Mamie, he said. I am saying yes, she said. I am saying it in my own way, which apparently involves filing cabinets, and you will need to get used to that. He stepped toward her, and she stepped toward him, and he took her face in those large, calloused, careful hands and he kissed her. And it was exactly what a first kiss in an open field in winter should be, warm and serious and full of intention and slightly longer than was strictly practical. When they separated, she kept her eyes closed for one more second, and then opened them and found him watching her with that expression that was no longer unguarded by accident but was unguarded by choice. I love you, she said. She said it the way she did most things, directly and without ornamentation. I came here looking for nothing and managed to find the one thing I had stopped believing was findable. You would think I would be more surprised. Are you not? He asked. Completely, she said. I am simply also practical. He laughed. It was a full, genuine laugh, the kind that has been suppressed for a long time and comes out with the specific relief of something released rather than something started. And she felt it as a physical thing, the loosening of something in him that she had been watching accumulate its tension for months. She laughed too. They stood in the north pasture of the Granger Ranch in February of 1882 and laughed in the cold air, and it was a very good sound against the silence of the valley. They were married in the spring. The wedding was not a large affair because neither of them wanted a large affair. Mrs. Prout cried. Hector stood up beside Warren with the composed dignity of a man who had been waiting for this for approximately the past 20 years and was not going to make a production of it. Eli and Cass and the other ranch hands cleaned themselves up and came to town and took up most of the back of the small clapboard church that Cutter's Bend had built the previous year. And Sheriff Reed gave Mamie away because there was no one else to do it, and he was honored to be asked. The reverend who performed the ceremony was a lean, quiet man named Brother Alcott, who had been traveling the circuit between Cutter's Bend and 2 other valley settlements, and who asked, when Mamie came to speak with him beforehand, if she had any specific passages she wanted included. Just the truthful ones, she said. He seemed to find this adequate and possibly refreshing. The ceremony was short and sincere. Warren said his vows in the steady, deliberate way he said everything that mattered, looking directly at Mamie with the full weight of his attention, and Mamie said hers with the directness that had always been her natural mode, clear-eyed and certain and unembellished. When Brother Alcott pronounced them married, Warren kissed her in front of Mrs. Prout and Hector and Eli and Cass and Sheriff Reed and the entire back section of that small church, and nobody seemed to mind. They had a small celebration at the ranch afterward, with food that Hector and Mrs. Prout had conspired to produce between them and a fiddle player who turned out to be Eli, which surprised everyone including Eli's own hands. The yard in front of the ranch house was strung with lanterns that swayed gently in the spring wind, and the mesa to the north was purple in the evening light, and the valley was enormous and indifferent and beautiful in the way it was always beautiful. Warren danced with Mamie in the fire-lit yard, One slow dance that was technically not very accurate to any established form of dancing, but which served the function of being an excuse to hold her close and move slowly and talk with his face near her hair. "Are you content?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, as she thought about everything. "Yes," she said. "I believe I am. Are you?" "More than I know what to do with," he said. He said it the way he said the things that mattered, simply and without embellishment. She leaned her head against his chest for a moment, just a moment, and felt the valley around them and the music and the warm light and the completely unexpected fact of being somewhere she did not want to leave with someone she did not want to leave behind. She had come to this valley looking for nothing. She had found considerably more than that. The first year of marriage had the quality of something being built. Not from nothing, but from the materials already present on both sides. Mamie's organizational precision and Warren's methodical patience and Hector's deep fondness for them, both expressed through consistent food and pointed opinions. And the daily ordinary work of a cattle ranch in New Mexico Territory in 1882. Mamie kept the books for the ranch and continued her 3 days a week at Aldridge's General Store, which Mr. Aldridge was grateful for, and which gave her a dimension of independence that she valued, and that Warren, to his lasting credit, had never once suggested she give up. He was not a man who found capable women threatening. He found them, as far as Mamie could determine, actively preferable, which she attributed partly to having grown up near his mother, a woman named Clara Granger about whom she had heard stories that suggested a formidable and deeply practical character. The filing cabinet was installed in the study to the left of the window in May. Warren had a carpenter from Cutter's Bend build real shelves in there as well, not boards on pegs but proper shelves with braces and a good finish. The kitchen door was rehung and ceased to draft. These were small things and also not small at all. They were the specific language of a man paying attention to what mattered to the person he loved, and Mamie understood them as such. She planted a kitchen garden in June, along the south wall of the house where the sun was reliable. She planted it with the practical intention of producing food, but she planted it also because it was hers, which was different from the land being hers. The land was a shared thing, but the garden was hers in the specific way that a project of one's own hands becomes one's own. Warren helped her build the raised beds without being asked, spending a Sunday morning working with his sleeves rolled up and his collar open, and when they had the beds built and the first seeds in and the whole thing watered, he stood back and looked at it with the same expression he wore when he looked at things that were well made. "It is going to be good," he said. "It is going to take 3 months to know," she said. "That is how everything good works," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, but he was also not looking at the garden. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." In the autumn of 1882, 3 things happened in approximately the following order. The first was that Mamie discovered she was expecting. She had suspected for several weeks before she was certain, and she was the kind of person who needed to be certain before she said anything. So Warren did not know until a Sunday morning in October when she told him at the breakfast table in the direct, unembellished way she told him everything, setting down her coffee cup and saying, "I have something to tell you." He went very still. She told him. He was quiet for a long moment. She watched his face do several things in rapid succession. Comprehension, then a kind of awe that was almost alarmed in its intensity, and then something that settled into something warm and deep and steady. "Mamie," he said, "we are going to need a new room," she said. "The study can stay as the study, but there is that back room that you are using for storage that could be properly converted. I have been looking at the dimensions." He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him hold it. "You have been looking at the dimensions," he repeated. He sounded like a man trying to anchor himself in the practical because the emotional was too large to stand in all at once. "I have also been thinking about the filing cabinet," she said. "It should be moved when we convert the room. It would fit better along the east wall of the study." He was looking at her with that look again. The one that she had watched grow more comfortable over the months of their marriage, less raw and unguarded by accident and more quietly, steadily loving by choice. "I love you," he said. "I know," she said. "I love you too. Now let us talk about the room." He laughed. She smiled. Outside the window, the valley was golden with autumn, the mesa catching the morning light in shades of amber and copper, and Mamie Hale, who was now Mamie Granger, sat at the kitchen table she had eaten at for months and held her husband's hand and thought that she had been wrong about one thing. She had thought she was done looking. She had thought she had packed up the part of herself that wanted things and closed the bag and left it on a platform in St. Louis. But what she had done, she understood now, was not stop wanting. She had simply stopped wanting the wrong things. And when she stopped looking for the wrong things, the right ones had been standing in a general store looking confused about an invoice. And the right thing had shown her a north pasture, and made her very good coffee, and tried very hard to find words for things that were too large for language. And the right thing had looked at her across a kitchen table with the flat, unguarded expression of a man who had decided she was necessary to him. She had found in the Cimarron Valley something she had not known she was looking for, and she was keeping it. The second thing that happened in autumn of 1882 was that Hector Delgado announced he was going to get married himself. This announcement was made at dinner, with the same composed dignity Hector brought to all significant communications, and it produced a reaction from Warren that could only be described as genuinely delighted shock, because Warren had long since given up expecting Hector to do anything other than work on the ranch and cook excellent food, and offer pointed opinions about everything. The woman's name was Rosa Sandoval. She lived in the settlement of San Cristobal, 12 miles south along the valley, and she was a widow of 40 with 2 grown children and a small adobe house that she owned outright and a reputation, according to Hector, for making the finest tamales in New Mexico territory. "When did this happen?" Warren demanded. "Over the course of a considerable time," Hector said. "I am not an impulsive man." "You have been going to San Cristobal every third Sunday for 2 years," Warren said. "Yes," Hector said. "I thought you had a cousin there." "I do," Hector said. "That is where I met Rosa." Mamie was trying very hard not to laugh. The third thing that happened in autumn of 1882 was that Mamie got the filing cabinet moved to the east wall of the study, and the back room converted, and the shelves in the new room built and painted, and by November the room was ready, which was good because the baby arrived in late December and needed somewhere to be. The baby was a boy, born on the 22nd of December in the main bedroom of the ranch house with a midwife from Cutter's Bend, named Mrs. Carson and Rosa Sandoval, who had by that point become a fixture in the lives of the Granger household, and a considerable quantity of snow falling outside the window. Warren was not in the room because Mrs. Carson was one of the old school of midwives who believed firmly that husbands were a complication. He was in the kitchen with Hector, and they had been there for 6 hours, and Warren had drunk enough coffee to unsteady a lesser man, and Hector had made biscuits twice because he needed something to do with his hands. When Mrs. Carson opened the kitchen door and told them the news, Warren stood up from the table so fast that his chair went back. "Healthy," was the first word out of his mouth. "Both of them," Mrs. Carson said. "You have a son, Mr. Granger." He looked at Hector. Hector looked at him. "Go," Hector said. He went. The room was warm and smelled of the lavender that Mrs. Carson apparently considered medicinal, and Mamie was propped against the pillows looking exhausted and entirely herself, which was to say composed and direct and absolutely in command of whatever room she was in, and she was holding a bundle that was his son. Warren stood in the doorway for a moment. Mamie looked at him. "Come in," she said. "Stop standing in doorways. You have been doing it since October." He crossed to her. He sat on the edge of the bed, and she passed him the bundle with the steady competence of a woman who had decided she was not going to be dramatic about this, and he held his son for the first time and understood, in the specific way you understand things that cannot be explained in advance, Why people said this changed everything. It did not change everything. The land was still outside and the valley was still enormous and Hector was still in the kitchen. But it added a dimension to everything that had not been there before, a new room in the architecture of being alive. "He needs a name," Mamie said. "I have been thinking," Warren said. "I know," she said. "You have been thinking since October. What did you arrive at?" He looked down at the small face in the bundle, which was the face of someone who had just arrived somewhere new and was reserving judgment. "James," he said, "for my father." He looked at Mamie. She was looking at the baby with an expression that was too complicated to reduce to a single word, but that contained, somewhere in its depths, the specific tenderness of a woman who had come to a valley looking for nothing and had built, without planning to, something that mattered absolutely. "James," she said. "Yes." James Warren Granger came into the world on the 22nd of December, 1882, in a room that had been converted from storage, with shelves built and painted by his father's hands, in a ranch house in the Cimarron Valley of New Mexico Territory, with snow falling outside and the mesa invisible in the dark and the valley enormous around him. He thrived. The years moved with the particular pace of lives that are full, fast in reflection, and detailed in experience. Hector married Rosa in the spring of 1883, in a ceremony in San Cristobal that Warren and Mamie attended with young James bundled against the April cool, and Rosa began spending half her time at the Granger Ranch and the other half at her house in San Cristobal, and she brought the tamales, which were in fact extraordinary, and she and Mamie developed the specific friendship of two practical women who respected each other's competence and had no patience for pretense. The ranch grew. Not dramatically, not the explosive speculative expansion of certain other operations in the territory, but solidly, the way things grow when they are tended with consistent attention. Warren added a second herd in 1883, contracted with a new buyer in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and expanded the bunkhouse to accommodate 2 more hands. Mamie reorganized the ranch accounts with the filing cabinet and the new shelves and a system she designed herself that Portillo, when he visited in the autumn of 1883 to finalize some remaining paperwork from the cross dispute, declared was the clearest set of ranch accounts he had ever seen in his legal career. "You should charge a fee for this system," Portillo told Mamie. "I have thought about it," she said. She had. She had also been quietly helping 2 other small ranchers in the valley with their accounts, at a modest fee, because it needed to be done, and she was the best person to do it, and the injustice of a system that would not admit women to the bar did not mean she could not find other ways to put her mind to productive legal-adjacent work. James learned to walk in the summer of 1883, toddling across the ranch house floor with the specific determination of a child who has decided that the distance between the sofa and the kitchen table is a problem to be solved. He had Warren's dark hair and Mamie's gray eyes, and the particular combination of their temperaments that produced a child who was serious and curious and laughed with his whole body when something actually struck him as funny. Warren, watching James walk across the yard for the first time on his own in September of 1883, had an expression that Mamie had never seen on him before and could not entirely describe, though she thought about it afterward, turning it over. It was something to do with having put something into the world that would outlast you. It was something to do with the north pasture and the blue grama grass and the spring near the mesa base, the things you protect because they matter beyond yourself. It was Warren Granger finding, in the face of his walking son, something he had not known he had been looking for, which was evidence that all the years of building and maintaining and holding onto the thing had been worth it, that it was not only his, that it was continuing. Mamie stood beside him and watched James fall down and get up and fall down again. "He is like you," she said. "How?" Warren asked. "He gets up," she said. Warren looked at her. There it was again. The full, unguarded quality of his attention when it was aimed at her. "He is like you too," Warren said. Yes, she agreed. He is going to be interesting. God help us, Warren said. But he said it with that almost smile becoming a full one, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and they watched their son discover the revolutionary fact of independent locomotion in the yard of the Granger ranch in the afternoon light, with the mesa rising behind the fence line and the valley extending in all directions, enormous and particular and theirs. In the winter of 1884, a woman arrived in Cutter's Bend who had a dark past that she was careful about, and Mamie, who recognized the specific quality of someone carrying something they did not intend to put down, helped her find work and a room at Mrs. Pruitt's, which Mrs. Pruitt was delighted to offer because she had always believed the boarding house was at its best when it held people who needed it. The woman's name was Eleanor Kane, and she had come from somewhere east of the Pecos, and she was not ready to talk about what she was leaving, and Mamie did not ask her to. And by spring, Eleanor Kane had quietly become part of the fabric of Cutter's Bend and was helping Mr. Aldridge in the store, and the dark past, while it remained hers to carry, became a lighter thing in the carrying of it. Mamie watched this process and felt in it a reflection. She had been Eleanor Kane 2 years earlier, arriving in a valley with a carpetbag and a heart that had been put away. The valley had held her the same way. She had been given the same space to exist in without being required to explain herself before she was ready. She thought about that, about what places do for people when they are the right place, and she thought about what people do for each other when they are the right person, and she wrote a letter to Mrs. Pruitt from the ranch house study, with James playing on the floor near the new filing cabinet, thanking her for the room and the $3 a week rate, and the particular gift of a woman who asked no questions. Mrs. Pruitt wrote back that she had known the moment she looked at Mamie that she was going to be all right. She just needed somewhere to land. The second child came in 1885. A daughter this time, born in June when the valley was full of the specific green of early summer, and the kitchen garden along the south wall was producing more than they could eat. Warren delivered the news to Hector with the somewhat dazed expression of a man who is starting to understand that his house is becoming something different from what it was, which was to say fuller. They named her Clara, for Warren's mother, and she arrived in the world with a decisiveness that she maintained ever afterward, her voice immediate and unambiguous from the first moment. Clara Granger had her mother's gray eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, and a personality that Rosa described, accurately, as entirely itself, from approximately the age of 3 weeks. Warren held Clara in the kitchen on the first evening, with James sitting on the floor nearby being carefully supervised by Hector, and he looked at his daughter with an expression that was identical to the one he had worn when he held James for the first time, but had its own particular dimension. The specific quality of a man discovering that love is not a fixed quantity but an expanding one, that having loved one person or thing does not diminish the capacity for loving another. Mamie, watching him from the doorway, felt something that had been her private definition of the word home for as long as she could remember settle into its final form. This was it. Not the building, though she loved the building with its wide porch and thick walls and the kitchen door that no longer drafted. Not the valley, though the valley had held her when she needed holding. Not even the man, though the man was central and essential, and she would not have built this life without him. It was the specific combination, the particular arrangement of these people in this place at this time. Hector making coffee and James on the floor and Warren holding Clara with his large, careful hands, and outside the window the kitchen garden in the June light, and beyond it the pasture and the fence line and the mesa, all of it exactly as it should be. She had come to the Cimarron Valley looking for nothing. She had been right that she was not looking, but she had found it anyway, and she was keeping it, every last piece of it, the filing cabinet and the raised beds and the man who communicated primarily by implication, and had learned over the years of their marriage to use actual words with increasing and sometimes disarming frequency. "Come here," Warren said, looking up from Clara and finding Mamie in the doorway. She crossed the kitchen. He put his free arm around her and she leaned against his side and looked down at their daughter, who was looking at the kitchen ceiling with the grave, evaluating expression of someone conducting a comprehensive survey. "She is judging the ceiling," Mamie said. "She is," Warren agreed. "She has strong opinions already." "She comes by it honestly," Hector said from the stove without turning around. James looked up from the floor. "Papa," he said, with the authority of a 2-year-old who did not intend to be peripheral to any significant development. "Up." Warren looked at Mamie. She took Clara so he could pick up James, and James settled on his father's hip with the proprietary ease of a child entirely secure in his position in the world, and Mamie held Clara against her shoulder, and Hector set 4 cups on the table, and Rosa came in from the back with a plate of something that smelled extraordinary. They stood in the kitchen as the June evening came down over the valley, and the conversation that followed was about nothing in particular and everything at once. Ordinary domestic talk about the garden and the herd and James's latest conviction that the horses were his personal property and Clara's opinion of the ceiling. Warren caught Mamie's eye across the table, and in that look was everything they had been to each other and everything they were and everything they had made together. The land dispute that had brought them into each other's orbit, the north pasture and the survey maps and the gun, and the way she had stepped between him and it without thinking. The doorway of the study and the February field and the wedding and the kitchen garden and James learning to walk and Clara investigating the ceiling, all of it in a single look. Private and complete, she looked back at him with everything she had. He smiled, the full one. The one that had taken weeks to arrive and that, once arrived, was a regular resident of his face when she was in the room. Outside, the valley held them in the way it held everything, without effort, without intention, simply by being large enough and old enough and sufficiently indifferent to specifics that there was room in it for anything. Room for a woman who arrived looking for nothing. Room for a man who had been looking for something he could not name until the day he found it standing behind a general store counter, holding a disputed invoice with the flat, unreadable expression of someone who had already calculated the cost of every possible outcome. The valley was there before either of them. It would be there after. But in the years between, it held the Granger ranch and the blue grama grass, and the spring near the mesa base, and the wide-porched house with the filing cabinet, and the kitchen garden and the children, and the repaired kitchen door and Hector and Rosa, and all the small and enormous accumulation of a life built by 2 people who had both, in their particular ways, come to the end of looking and found each other in the same place at the same time. Which was the only magic the world reliably produced, and the one that required the least explanation. Warren Granger had been looking for something he could not name for 3 years before Mamie Hale arrived in the Cimarron Valley on a November afternoon with a carpetbag and a heart she had decided was closed. He had found it. She had found something she had not known she was missing. And the valley held them both, and the years moved through it with the light, and the Granger ranch endured in the way that things endure when they are made of the right materials and tended by people who understand the difference between holding on and holding together. It endured. They endured. And that, in the end, was the whole of it, the complete thing. The closed circle, the resolved question, the answered want. A woman who came to the valley looking for nothing. A man looking for something he could not name. The finding. The keeping, the life built in the space between what they had each given up and what they discovered against all their own expectations was still possible, all of it, every word of it, true.